you have to pace yourselves and, know the material, but also don't overcommit because, like, then you set up yourself for failure, and that's, like, the worst pit that you could be in where it's, like, emotionally so hard to come out of.
Hello! Welcome to Chopping It Up.
I'm Jeff.
I'm Sean.
And we're just two editors here just chopping it up about the art of editing and the ins and outs of the daily life of being an editor.
Yeah, so today I thought we started off with just talking about either a scene or a movie or something that we really appreciated the editing on. And Jeff, you want to go first?
Sure. I've been watching a lot of Marvel stuff, but there was this one scene in Daredevil Season 2. It's like episode 3 or 4 where the Punisher captures Daredevil, and they're kind of arguing about what they have to do with this guy. And basically, while that's happening, these people are trying to kill them. And so there's this whole thing about them having this like mental struggle about like what to do with this guy, being intercut with people like trying to find them and everything. And just like the tension and the way it was done and going in and out of each storyline, like the whole episode was just really well edited together and stuff. So yeah,
so really well paced and stuff, kind of really going back and forth.
The energy and the tension of the whole episode was just like you're like on pins and needles and stuff the entire time. It was just really, really well done. I haven't felt like that for an episode for a while and stuff. So
nice.
But what about you?
Oh man, if we're doing something recent, I think like the first episode, the pilot of The Bear, where you just kind of get into the kitchen and everything's all crazy and like knives back and forth, and it just it really sets the tone for the whole series. So just like that, it's like chaos in the kitchen and you're up against the clock, and yeah, it's just exciting. And then I think they have like a track from The Refused on there. It's like and so you're just like on edge, kind of, the whole time. But yeah, that's
yeah.
I definitely like that scene. Yeah.
And they get Counting Crows in there a lot. Oh no,
yeah,
that was the one they used Pearl Jam. I think they got
Pearl Jam use a lot of Pearl Jam. They have a Counting Crow song as well. Yeah, that's later on. I don't think that's during the intense parts, but yeah, that's there is a Counting Crow.
I think it was always during the credits or something like that or whatever.
Yeah, it was somewhere in there.
Sean, who do we have on the show today?
Today we have my good friend and a phenomenal editor, Ezra Paek. And he's done some great docs. Most recent is called Cipher, and it's on Hulu. And he's also done a couple other HBO docs. And yeah, what's your favorite one out of these?
I really like Bank She Does New York. I thought that was really
that's
well
a good one. Yeah.
But
yeah, without further ado, here's Ezra.
Hey,
Yeah.
We got Ezra Paek, right? That's correct.
Oh, yeah.
So today, I think we're just going to start off with how you got into editing. What inspired you to get into editing?
Money at first, and then naturally the art. Okay, but
that's honest. Okay, I like it.
Wait, so you thought you could make money first before you got into editing?
Well, so what happened is, like, so I went to school for, at the time, economics. I had this whole grand ambition of being like a management consultant. I don't know where that dream came from, but to me, that was like, dude, that's how I'm going to make it in life. And, and then I graduated like around a little after the recession, like in 07, 08. So the job market was super bad.
So the worst time to graduate.
Yeah, worst time to graduate.
Worst time, I would say.
But I was paying for college on my own. So like at the time, Shauna, we have a mutual friend who got me a job in LA as a night logger. Each summer in between, school, like I would fly out, work, the summer and winter vacations as like, like a night AE. And Shaw's the one that really showed me the entire world. At first when I met Shaw, I had no idea. Like, I didn't know that he, grew up in Taiwan and all that. But, we obviously immediately clicked, and then he got me, like familiar with Avid, just pretty much the whole industry. And so that was always super fun. But at the time, I just did all that just for money because, like I was making like $500 a week. And compared to what I could do at school, working like part-time, I was like, dude, I'll be set, if I just do this during my breaks.
Yeah.
So did that. And then once I graduated, like I couldn't get any job. The only thing that I had going on for me was, being an AE. So I was like, screw it. Might as well, just keep on working and then keep on applying to jobs, and I did this for like a year. Eventually I moved to New York. got some editing gigs, and then, went from there. And now I really enjoy it. Super fun. It's creative, great, constant challenges and, meeting new people. So happy that it worked out the way it did.
So, and when you moved to New York from LA, did you know anybody there or?
No. So back to, me like pursuing this like idea of working in corporate America, it not happening, it got me super depressed. Shaw knew all about it because I would, complain to Shaw all the time. It was super bad emotion because like, I had this goal. I was nowhere, achieving it. And I'm here to suck doing, night AE work. Like, what am I doing? Fresh out of college, my life is ruined. All of that nonsense. Shaw's the one that's always constantly talking me off the ledge. It's like, like you can apply for other jobs. He would drive me to interviews. I remember specifically, like, I don't want to do it, but he's like, dude, get in the car, we're going.
And this is in LA. This is in LA, right?
Yeah,
in LA,
this is in LA.
LA.
Yeah. I was like, man, he went to New York and
I
drove.
can't believe he didn't go to New York.
No, yeah.
He's a good dude.
We're still in LA. I'm sure he would have if I asked him to. But and then eventually, like, you know what? I need a new start. So never been to New York. I had one contact in New York. She was a story producer that, she worked at Go Go Lucky. She moved back to New York saying, hey, like, if you ever need a place to crash, hit me up. And her and her family took me in. So outside of that, like, no connection to New York whatsoever. Never been. And I got this AP job through a mutual friend. Pretty much the showrunner said, hey, like, I see on your resume you're not that experienced. It's your first AP gig. And you've never been in New York, but listen, like, I don't care because if you, mess up on the first day, you're going to be fired. So there was a lot of pressure. And
that's a lot of pressure.
He said that?
A lot of pressure.
I can't believe someone said that. Wow.
I think he wanted to make sure that, like, I wasn't going to go in there with false intentions or just idea that, like, everything's going to be, rosy. Just laying down the law, hey, like, this is what's going to happen. So if you're really up for it, you have the job, but know that, like, at any given moment, like, if you don't, succeed, then you're back to New York or back to Chicago. So
wow.
I took that up with 2 suitcases with whatever gets fit, flew to New York, and then pretty much somehow found myself in New York for like the next like 13, 14 years. So
wow.
Yeah, that worked out. Yep.
Nice.
Yep. And then through that,
So you started as an AP and then you went back to editing, or?
So up until that point, I wasn't really an editor. I was still, at the most, I was a junior editor. And then decided I don't want to do editing. I want to be more of a producer because that felt more in line with my original goals of, being in corporate, whatever. So what the turning point was is that I was a story producer on the show, and the showrunner had me locking episodes, so editorially, like she would sit down with me in the edit bay, and I would do, the notes and, polish up. And that got me thinking, like, why am I getting paid as a story producer and not being paid more money as an editor when I'm going to be doing the editing job? So that's when I realized, all right, let's just really commit to editing and see how far we could go. And then that's when, I started pursuing, all right, getting more editing work. And then eventually I met, different, showrunners, editors that got me to my next job, and eventually worked myself to, handling, my own episodes and series and whatnot.
So, as for the people that don't know, an AP, like, what kind of stuff does an AP normally do? So what do they do normally?
So that's an associate producer, and typically, you're really there just helping out the editors. And it also depends on the show. So the show was called Storm Chasers. So it was me like hitting up like all these news outlets to get, acquired footage, licensing and all that. And on other shows, it would be me like going through the raw footage and finding specific bites that the editors needed, sound ups, or kind of, providing a very, very rough, string out to hand off to. And then because of my assistant editing gigs, I was very like comfortable with that. So it's easy for me to, find stuff, do stuff, and also do a little light editing on the side for the editors where they're like, hey, can you just kind of put this together, do a rough score and hand it off. It was all coming very full circle with me, where it's like, all right.
So you do kind of like junior editor stuff while you were doing AP stuff. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And part of that was like the hiring too. It's like, hey, they knew me as a very solid, AE that wanted to, go to producing. So they're like, hey, like it would always be a little bit of negotiation where it's like, we'll get you on this job. You got to do a little bit of upfront AE work, help the show get going, and then afterwards we'll give you like the AP opportunities and possibly story producing opportunities. So that's like I did that for a couple of gigs, and then eventually, yeah, like on the last story producing gig that I had, it was so much editing that I realized that if this is what what people see me as, then I might as well pursue editing. I went on it 100%.
So what was your first real or credited editing job?
I remember this. It was New York Geek. So up until that point, I was a junior editor, and it was 2:00 in the morning when the showrunner, we were locking an episode. He just looked at me and was like, "Hey, how would you like your first editing credit?" I was like, "Really?" And I was like, "It was also 2:00 in the morning." It's like, we're here, like, I think I deserved it. Yeah.
Okay, I like it.
Well, yeah, that showrunner gave me, he gave me my first true editor credit, and then brought me onto other shows that helped me like start stacking credits, which for definitely in reality you definitely need before you could start more fun stuff or like content that you want to work on.
And what was your first like documentary that you worked on?
The first true one, I guess, would be
Wet Hot American Summer.
Yeah, Wet Hot American Summer. Yeah, I also did that for free.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So I did it on the side when I was a junior editor. And what it was is that the director came in with a whole bunch of tapes that she had behind the scenes of when they were making the film. And said, hey, we want to try to let's see what you can come up with. Is this like a 20-minute piece? Can it be a feature?
Right.
And so over the course of a couple months, working nights and weekends, go into the office and then piece things together, and eventually they did sell it to Netflix.
Don't put my head on naked Alyssa Milano's body.
Dude, put my head on her body.
Everybody get into the water. That's where you are, you and your daughter.
But that was like the first true one, and then through that, the producer on it, he's the one that okay, I think he saw that. All right, I'm able to really pursue or have like an expertise in like docs and at least crafting something from nothing. So he would put me on like all these other small projects, and from that point on, our relationship grew to us, working on more funded projects and fun stuff.
Yeah. So when you did the Wet Hot American Summer, it was just you by yourself. You didn't have an AE. You got everything. You digitized everything.
Yep. I was the AE and the editor, which I like. Which I like, I like the control. It's like, all right, when I need stuff, I know when I'm going to get it because, yeah, exactly.
But you did the AE work and the editing work, and you put it together in like, you said like a couple months? You put together, dude, that's hardcore, man. Which is good. I don't know how much footage there was, but I mean, like, was I'm assuming, like, do you know how many hours of footage it was or anything like that?
Yeah, it was about, I think, 30 or 50 hours.
Okay, gotcha.
Raw.
Yeah.
And, but that experience, like, I was super proud of, because it is like I did a lot in a short amount of time. But then I got this big head thinking that, man, I can crush any project that comes my way. And on my next project, I really had a hard time because I just, overbooked myself, where I was trying to edit another feature doc on the side. And man, that was like the second time in my life where I had like a depression, because like I was so overwhelmed and felt like I did way more than I could chew. And eventually we had to get another editor to help out. But that was like a huge learning experience where I'm like, all right, you have to pace yourselves and, know the material, but also don't overcommit, because like then you set up yourself for failure. And that's like the worst pit that you could be in, where it's like emotionally so hard to come out of.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one thing. That's a good thing to bring up, because like, I think every editor learns it at some point in time, where you're like, you're just so happy to get work that you don't know how to turn it down, or like to, or just to make room for your life so you don't get, go crazy or whatever. Cause I had the same problem. I was doing a show, and I was also it started out as I was finishing up a feature while I went on to a show. And then this other feature that I did before the show came back. So I was working on 2 features and a TV show at the same time. And like, after a month and a half, like my brain just shut down, and I didn't understand any, like, I just couldn't understand like simple directions and everything, because I was so just like overwhelmed and everything. And like, but it was, but it's a thing that you have to learn, where you're like, there is a limit, and everybody just has to learn what that limit is over time. Everything and stuff.
It's sad because, like, I always feel like, it's not a physical, work that we're doing. So you should have unlimited amount of creativity, energy. But I slowly realized that is not the case. I think I caught myself, like, on a good day, I have like 6 solid hours of, like, this is where my brain is at optimal capacity, and I can really, figure out problems and, really, be efficient with my editing. And after that, then it's just like kind of dies down throughout the day. And that's when I'll do like really mundane tasks where, like fixing titles or just like something where you don't have to think. So I learned to kind of compensate my ability to not be able to work all day, all the time. But I'm still learning that, lesson, because after a good project, we're happy. You're like thinking, man, I got this. I got the next one. And then, you think too much of yourself and then realize,
I think that is the greatest danger right there, where you've had the worst time, and then at the end they're like, this is so great. You're like, oh yeah, I can do this again, and then you do the same thing again.
It's a cycle. Yep.
Yeah, it's a bad cycle.
Totally.
But
it's the weird thing of like after a job, like the whole way you're going through it, you're like, this is the worst job ever. And then you get done, you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. I could do this again. And then,
there's so many moments where I'm like sitting there like, dude, I want to quit. I have to quit. Like, this is that's not happening. And then once it gets, when we were done locking, then you feel like, oh, that wasn't too bad. But I remember, on everybody, there's definitely moments where I'm like, I can't do this right now. Like, it's too much. What's the worst that could happen if I were to quit right now? Which is, the constant, thoughts that I have in my head when things get tough. But it always works out.
So, so when you started doing docs, like, were you mostly your own assistant for a while and doing the docs and everything, or?
So after Wet Hot, that's when when I truly felt that I didn't have that imposter syndrome, and they did give me like AEs that will, prep stuff for me. At that point, it would be like, and a lot of times, like early on, it would be me jumping onto other docs to help finish it. Whether it's, there's conflict issues where the editor had to, leave for a different project, or just creative differences, like they would put me on and, help, like make sure that we meet the deadlines, whether it's going to a film festival or because it's Seoul, we have to deliver. And so that's where, I started getting more confident, because it was at that point, it's just me and maybe the director and producers, like, and they'll check in like maybe once a week, maybe every other week, saying, hey, like, how's the edit? Can we see some stuff? And then show bits and pieces, and, and eventually we'll all sit in a room together and, get it done. But that was like the first couple docs where it's like, it wasn't me jumping from the start and finishing it. It's more like, they'll put me on, towards the back end of it and help finish it. And
help polish it. Oh, okay. That's cool.
Yeah. And that was a good experience, because it kind of, eased me into it. Yeah. Rather than all of a sudden, like, because, with that was a different scenario where there was less pressure, expectations, and there wasn't really a hard deadline. That's, it will get done when it gets done. But then as you venture into other projects where there's more responsibility and more pressure to, get things right the first time and deliver on time, then it's a little bit overwhelming. So I felt like I had an easier route in terms of you're not going to take 100% of it, take a little bit at the end, and then eventually that responsibility grew more and more until then I started, cutting everything from start to finish.
Compared to, reality, what are the big differences? I think there's an interesting thing between reality TV and docs. What's the compare and contrast, just a little bit of those?
For me as an editor, I think docs are easier to cut in the sense that like there's more creativity involved, where, like, for example, like for reality shows, I feel like you're always kind of constrained to like what the network wants. And so you can't get too cute with, edits. Like they'll say, hey, this is too flashy, or, this is too artsy for us, so you're always in this confinement of like, what they've done in the past and what they kind of want to replicate. And, they always constantly refer to shows like, hey, like, we want this series to be more like this, or in the vein of, this. So even though that may sound, a lot of times it's easy in the sense that like, there's less thinking about like what the tone of the show is going to be. But then, like you're always trying to also like time constraints, like, each show has to be a certain, minutes long, and just trying to cram all this, content into that, format is like, I think one of the bigger challenges. Whereas with docs, it's, want to create the best story. And a lot of times, like I've been fortunate enough to work on projects where they have enough funding where it's like, all right, if we need the time to make it right, we have the money to do it. And so in that sense, there's less pressure. But then the pressure comes where, because it's so open-ended and there's so many ways you could cut it, like start overthinking yourself, doubting yourself. Is this good enough? Is it what they wanted? And then, then you have to face those challenges, and you got to kind of fight through those emotions. So that way you're still, moving the dog editorially forward, but also finding yourself space to kind of like think outside the box and try to create something really special and cool.
And for dogs, you don't have like story producers or anything too, right?
Yeah, in my experience, no, it's always just been, I know like in some other, dogs, they'll attach like a story producer, they'll help. And depending on the project, sometimes a director themselves would be, fulfill that role by, looking at the raw and then saying, hey, like this is the bite that we want. This is a moment that, we shot that, I think could live in the, the dock somewhere.
Yeah.
But for the most part, what happens nowadays is that they'll give me a whole bunch of footage and say, hey, like we'll see you in like a couple months. See the first cut and then we'll go from there. So it's not until I get it to a place where it's a watchable state that the ideas will start coming in from everyone else and the director and feel like, all right, let's take it this direction, or, let's cut this out. It's not working. And, go through that process.
So how long is that cut that you're showing? Like, is that like an hour, whatever it is?
I generally I think this is me just working in reality for so long. I'd like to be on the spot, so I always gear towards like an hour, 20 minutes, because that's typically the range that, feature's going to be at. So I rarely ever give, because I know I've seen cuts where it's like, the rough is like over 2 hours long. I also don't want to do extra work for no reason. It's just like, all right, when I go through a raw, I'd feel like, all right, what are the best moments? Lay that out and then kind of rough it out on a timeline that might be, like 2-3 hours long, but then eventually before everyone else sees it, get it really down to a manageable state. Because like when it's rough, no one wants to sit through 2-3 hours of content. It's like it's
no,
especially when it's not scored, when it's not covered. I mean, that's a tough ask. And I think that's where people get a little bit into the mindset of like, we got to give notes. So we'll give any type of notes, and then that could be detrimental since like it cuts out even at a place where you could have these notes, and then you might take those notes and then into consideration and go off on a tangent and then realize that it's not working out. So I always a big thing for me is to get it as close to what it needs to be as possible, and then, see what the reactions are and then go from there.
So when you jump on to the docs that you've kind of like taken over with, like, is it usually like a certain amount of time, like a 6-week thing, or is it kind of just whenever it's done kind of thing?
It's at least I want to say 3 or 4 months. On a short end, when the doc is almost pretty close, but it needs reshoots or pickup shots of interviews that they need to tell the full story, or just editorially a big pass on music and style. Those might be 2-3 weeks, but a lot of times when I've jumped on, they'll give me 3 or 4 weeks or 3-4 months to kind of go through the footage, because at that stage it's a creative problem that hasn't been solved yet, and so you do need the time to kind of look at all the raw and see what else is there that we can do differently to make this better or make more sense or whatever the case may be. So, and you need time for that, and that's one thing that I got comfortable with, because it's I'm always worried about, am I too slow? Am I taking too long? Is someone going to email me and say, hey, can we see something, when I have nothing to show for? So those anxieties, I kind of got used to it. And I always tell people especially the post soup, hey, I need at least X amount of weeks to do a first pass, get familiar with the project, get to know what, the goal of, this edit is, whether it's we want to work on the specific section or we need a big pass on the entire thing. And so I let them, hey, it's going to take X amount of weeks or months. So that way, I don't put myself in a corner where all right, in 2 weeks, I got to, do everything, which is going to be impossible. And, you stretch yourself out and fall into that hole.
Feature editors get 12 weeks to edit their stuff, and it's scripted, and you have less time, and you don't even know what the hell it's about yet. That's pretty good, man. Yeah,
it's scary. And I think I've come to realize that so much of it is also luck, because there's a lot of times where I come up with something, I'm like, man, this is pretty good. I'm a borderline genius. But then I saw this random shot or fight as I was scrolling through that someone missed, and that sparked an idea, or allowed me to look at a scene differently. So I feel like a lot of times it's like you got to put in the time, and eventually you'll find this like piece of inspiration, whether it's in the raw footage or in the current cut that you didn't see before, and then go from there.
That doesn't seem like luck, as it means is that you work really hard at what you do and everything. It seems like,
it can be definitely hard work. Yeah, I'm not slacking around here. But sometimes I look at stuff, I'm like, man, I'm so lucky to have found that bite or shot that works so well, or that piece of music that like really just puts everything together. Because sometimes, that's all you need is the right piece of music, which is one thing that I think is a struggle.
And on documentaries, do you have like a music supervisor that you can call to get music, or are you just like, I think this music's cool, then we'll fix it later kind of thing? Or
it depends on the project. Because so I work with the director Chris Markleball. Like we have a great a relationship. He's super creative. He's super into music, and he'll like curate a big playlist for each doc that we've done and say, this is like, the soundscape that I see this film in. And it's pretty extensive. So there's always, different moods and themes that, I could go with. So working with, a director like him, they'll supply, the overall music for it. And then there's other projects where it's the complete opposite, which is, you figure it out, like see what works. And then, we'll go from there. And at that point, I constantly always listen to, or try to listen to new music. And at least like once a week, I just go through Spotify and see, hey, like go through like other people's playlists and see what, catches my ear, and then save it and say, oh, this might be a good song for, like this type of moment, and categorize it. So that way, when I jump into a project, I could have like a Rolodex of, like songs that I could go through and try out. Because like looking for songs is the hardest. It's
no, that's a great idea.
Stressful for me.
Like, can you get the rights to all that music on Spotify or what?
So it depends. Like, I think we've had like, in my experience, like about like 80% success rate, where as long as you're not going like super like top 100, even if it's an obscure track, everyone has like a representative that you can reach out to and ask, hey, like what will it cost? Some of them will be like, oh, like $500. I think the norm might be like $5,000, $10,000 for this thing. But and then once you reach like to the $40,000, then you really have to think like, is this really necessary?
That's like needle drop territory of like, that's like
exactly, Do you really need it? And then I think that's a judgment that's different to the director, because like if they really want it, then they'll fight for it. But if it's like we don't really, there's other and that's when like a music supervisor, if there's one for project, will come in and say, hey, like we can't afford these tracks. Here are some like similar sounding music you could try out and see if it works. So it'll be like a constant, like back and forth between like, all right, can we get the rights? Can we pay for it? If not, what are the, alternatives?
So speaking of, so you work with this guy, Chris, what's his name? Chris Markleball? Yeah. So so what stuff, you worked on some big stuff with him. What have you worked on with him exactly?
So my first project with him, and also this was my next project, big project after the Wet Hot American Summer doc, was based in New York.
You know what it was? It was the integration of the street and social media.
What was happening on the streets was happening so fast. There were camera crews interviewing people immediately. So I knew that this was going to be an important event for 31 days in the city of New York, prompted by Banksy.
The editor, she did a great job with it, and I think it was like like schedule wise, like she had to jump on something else, so they just needed me for about like 3 weeks just to add a couple pickups and just do a pass at it. But that's the first time I met him, and then he realized, oh, okay, some of the new stuff that I put in, like, oh, like this feels really good. And then he brought me on to his next project. It's called Wakefest, and it's a big drag festival in New York that they brought back from like from the earlier days.
I needed Wigstock to find people in this world that are fighting a similar fight.
And then the latest one we did was, Cipher, which is a really cool project because it's like my first step into like scripted, where it's told in a documentary, a traditional music documentary, but then it goes into more of a scripted narrative, which I've never done before. So that was a fun experience.
Yeah, and it got accepted to Sundance, right? Is that?
So we premiered at Tribeca and it won
Oh,
like the
that's good.
Founders Award for Best Narrative. And then I think he's also won other awards through other festivals. And then, yeah, now it's on Hulu. So I think, Hulu bought it. So.
Everybody go check it out.
Yeah, go check it out.
So how much was it mostly like, how much of it was actually scripted and how much was, like more of a documentary style?
So I want to say the first 20 minutes is flat out like documentary where it's just telling Tierra Whack, the artist, and her story, her background as, an up-and-coming rapper from Philadelphia. And then literally like at around like the 20-minute mark is when, you see glimpses of script coming into play. And then we'll kind of balance that out with another verite, traditional music doc moment where she's going on tour or whatnot. And then another piece of scripted content where like, all right, now we're just trying to get the audience ready for the end, which is, all fabricated.
Nice. And how long did it take you to put that together?
Well, another editor or a couple editors worked on it before me. And it's funny because like Chris emailed me saying, hey, can you work on this project? It's like, it's my baby. Like it's going to be super weird, interesting. But at the time I couldn't do it because I had another project. But then a year later he said, hey, like we're still working on it. Can you jump in? And then, at that point, like I was the only editor on it and they had it good enough, like, more than a string out. Like there's definitely scenes that I feel like were fleshed out, but he had the ending was a big thing that needed, like he needed help with. Like that's kind of what can we do to really convey this theme and message that I'm trying to do. So I would say at that point, the film was probably like maybe like 20% done in a sense where like, okay, like, these portions are pretty good to go. The other 80, we still need, we got to do a whole bunch of reshoots, new shoots to really tell the story. And then also we got to figure out the best way to end it. And that process, I want to say that's about like 5 months. And then we took a little bit of a break and then just to do all the finishing touches, swapping graphics and all that was another couple of weeks at the back end.
Wow. So that project in total took like a year and a half or something. Wow. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I think they kind of got screwed over by COVID because they started shooting during COVID and I think started editing.
Right.
Yeah. So like there was a little bit, I think that's where a lot of, like things happen where, things get lost in translation.
But it seems like documentaries, like some can take years, right? That's a crazy thing. Right?
Yeah.
With reshoot and everything, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, fortunately for me, I've never been in a situation where it lasted more than a year, but there's definitely ones I could totally see things where like, especially if you're kind of, you need to shoot more stuff, but people aren't available for interviews or, if it's like event based, then you got to wait till next year. Then I'm sure things could get, because there's definitely documentaries where like, it takes years to come to fruition. I like the idea that once you're done with it, that's it. It's a nice feeling. And then you get into mindset like, oh, I can do this all over again. And you do.
So now to the real questions. Have you met Banksy? And what does he look like?
we did get an email from Pest Control, which is their I think like they represent him. I don't know in what capacity, but they're saying, hey, like we've heard that you guys are doing a doc about Banksy. And so we sent them a cut just to make sure that, hey, like, I think the big idea was that are we representing what the meaning behind certain art of his art pieces are? And so like that was it. I think they had like two notes where it's like, hey, like actually this is not what's nature. So it was nothing like creative where it's like, hey, like take that out or take this in or expand on that. It's more like, no, what you have in the dog, like these are like the couple moments where like I feel like you misrepresented what the true nature of the art is. And so then we'll have to fix that up because we want to stay true to like the meaning of it. So yeah, I mean it was very limited, but like props to them for handling.
But
they get
in a weird way, you say, hey, like you've got notes from Banksy. That's pretty cool. Like
I guess, yeah. I mean,
but sometimes you get to go out on the shoots, right, in the field.
Yeah.
So has that been helpful? And what? Because you went to where? Cuba for that major laser doc.
Yeah.
Right?
So for a very long time in my career, I had a contract with Matador Content, great company, and they've always done like really like cool stuff. And part of that is like, yes. So one of the docs I did was Give Me Future, which is when Major Lazer went to Cuba after I think Obama, like, entered negotiation. Yeah. And so they had a big concert that they were expecting maybe like 20,000 people, but it came out to be like almost 500,000. And so I was there like at the concert, and I've never seen 500,000 people in my life, but I get to it like crazy. It's just it also really helps because like what's being shot, and you also are with the director, so that way when they're finding their vision, like you see the evolution of it, and then see what they're trying to get, so that when you get into the edit, it's like you're not starting from scratch. You have this wealth of knowledge of what's been shot, what the the journey was, and then kind of put that into the edit. And another one, I actually got to go to Antarctica on a boat. We were following a group of rowers that were rowing from Chile all the way to Antarctica. What they did was and we were following them on a boat for I think like 14 days, and it's a group of 6 men that would alternate 3 out of 3, and they have to row every like nonstop, because if they stop, then they get pushed back. So like it's constantly, what they do is they take 90-minute shifts, like 90 minutes, 3 men row, the other 3 sleep, eat, do whatever they can, then they switch. And they did that for every single 90 minutes for a course of 13, 14 days.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So, and these are like super athletic, ultra competitive, fit, human specimen that are just, like our machines doing it.
And they're doing this on the open ocean? They're doing this on the open ocean
across the Drake Passage, which is known to be very treacherous because of, I'm not a scientist, but of how water works. But, here we are on another boat, like a research vessel in the warmth, eating home-cooked meals, and just, so there's a sense of guilt. But at the same time, you can also
they
see
did it. They signed up.
Yeah. Don't force them to. So, but being part of that entire journey was great, because now like there's a personal attachment to it, where like I was there, I saw all this stuff, and I felt like I was part of their journey. So when you get into the edit, you could kind of convey very similar emotions, because when they first saw land, I remember I was awake. I actually filmed it, knowing that, oh my god, they finally did it. So you have this sense of like, this is amazing, like because there was always a chance that they might not be able to make it because of your health or your safety. So it was never guaranteed, but and we didn't know how long it was going to take. Everyone was prepared for it to be like weeks on weeks, but they actually did it in a couple weeks. So, but going through my own emotions too, I think really helps, because when you see the footage, I remember like, oh, this is how I felt, because this was the stormiest day. It was very scary, or they saw land, like, oh, the joy that everyone felt, like we're just so close to being to the finish line. So being on set I think definitely helps. And also just knowing that all the footage that you experience, like for the most part, it's there. So anytime like you're stuck on like, how do I get from this point to this next point, you have this wealth of knowledge to know that, all right, I remember they did this or that because I experienced it. How can we fit this in, and then kind of work that piece puzzle.
Did you experience any producer lens where you're like, oh, this is a great moment, and then when you actually saw it, you're like,
100%.
That was terrible.
I was like, yeah. Like, there's moments where I'm like, man, this is in my head at the time, like, I have the perfect music for this. I had the perfect way I'm going to get into it. It's going to be epic.
Right.
And then when I get into the end, I'm like, man, this is such a stupid idea. Like, what was I thinking? Or it's so cheesy. Like, oh my God.
Okay.
Like, doing these lyrics. To like, I swear I remember seeing this. We shot it. I know, like, because I did it myself, and I can't find it. So that's when I really like understood, the difficulties of production, where it's just like, you're constantly under the gun. There's constant, things that you could film, but like, it's just super hard. So that's when I really formed even a higher respect for people working in production, because it's like there's like the physical element too of just like constantly, and the cameras are heavy, like no matter the size, like just to hold on to it for all days on end, it's tough.
And what was that documentary called? Shout it out for everybody.
That is the Impossible Row. It's on Discovery Plus.
The most dangerous ocean crossing in the world is from South America to Antarctica. Colin O'Brady wants to be the first in history to cross the treacherous Drake Passage in a rowboat.
What advice would you give to up-and-comers up and comers who want to get into editing, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the landscape has shifted so much, and as much as we all love remote work, I think that really hurt it quite a bit because, like if I look at my experience, it's so much human to human, contact and relationships that you build that really, and that's the true nature of it. Is that it's who you know and not necessarily what you know. And each time, like I get new jobs, it's literally through a reference, and I always tell myself, hey, I should probably one of these days make a reel, but I never had the time to because like the moment that I start, all right, I'm not working, let's put a little effort into my portfolio. Then someone hits me up and say that, hey, I knew this person, they recommended you, are you available? And then it's always been just word of mouth, and to get that, I think you need to have that basis of like working in the same room together. So it's super tough now because like there's so many editors I could work remotely, and I don't know what the process is for assistant editors. Like, how do you even get in?
Right.
But it's like, but my whole thing was always from the get go. Like, I did a lot of free work, and that's for me to. I put a lot of time in, and knowing that like some of these might not pay off, and some of them definitely didn't. But you just need one or two to really like push you forward, and then that one person that really is gonna start recommending you will lead to one or two others, and those one or two others will, and it's exponentially grow your network. So, but for me, starting off, like, I did, like, I remember I would go on Mandy.com, and if people are looking for editors.
On Mandy? Oh, man, that's old school.
Mandy.com, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wait, does that not exist?
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, like, it sucks that, you should get paid for your work, but, when you're starting out, I feel like, there's so many other people that are willing to do the same, and you gotta,
right.
Kind of give in a little bit, and you should, know when to stop, like, because you don't want to be taken advantage of. But for me,
right.
with my first dog, like, I did that for free, knowing that, hey, like, what means more than like that extra $5,000, $10,000, whatever it might be, is the network, and that's what helped my career. Is that I met the producer, the director that would recommend me for other projects. So, and then that's where
Right,
truly,
totally.
like, where I was able to really do a lot more documentaries versus reality. Is that I did that one free project, and through that, all these other opportunities came, and that's my that's my biggest takeaway in my own personal career. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think it's a
networking
balance, right? You can't do too many free stuff.
Yeah,
Free
no, you can't.
things,
Well,
right?
it's also like you do free stuff, and then you kind of figure out which free ones are worth it and which ones aren't. Like
Right.
the more you do them
Right,
and
right.
everything. And,
Well, and
yeah.
he did a free one for Wet Hot American Summer,
Yeah.
which is a big thing, right? So that was like probably smart because it was a big cult like movie, So yeah, I guess being strategic, right? That always helps.
It's definitely you get better at finding good what works and what doesn't. But
Right.
yeah, it's I mean, outside of that, yeah, I mean, it's just you got to work at it because like the
Just
moment that you have an
grinding.
opportunity to edit, yeah, because like you want to be ready, and that's what I've always done. Like when I was really pursuing editing, is that even on my off time, I would just like work on editing just to make sure, all right, speed fast enough with it, so that way when the
Yeah.
opportunity came where you had a showrunner sit down with you, hey, like let's see if you got the chops. That's what they would always say. They would sit down with you and say, let's let me see you work. And so you want to make sure that you press it by not only at a technical level where Avid or Premiere, also in terms of storytelling point of view, like you've gone through enough of these exercises, so what bite's gonna work well, what variety moment that you need, what sound of, how to get in and out of scenes, so that way when you're put on the spot, you succeed. So just being prepared, I think, is at the very least, that's the very least thing you could do. And again, like going back to like you got to work at it. So that's part of I think what helped me. Like when I got the opportunity to sit down with the showrunner, just for them to like do notes with me, like I wasn't like anxious or just scared of because I've been through enough of that to understand like, all right, I know what I'm doing, or at least I feel confident that this is the right way to do it, and that they'll
Right.
be impressed because you're young and they didn't expect that much from you. But okay, so he does know how to push buttons the right way, and that gives you more opportunities.
Boom. There you
Boom.
go. So Kai, I have a couple questions. So one, what's been your favorite project to work on?
Man, that's a tough one. I think, I mean, Cipher is in recent memory like one of my favorite because it's so different,
Right.
and I love working with Chris. Is like he just sees the world in such a different way than I do, and so it's always like creatively refreshing and recharging to work with him because like he's this very his mindset is and perspective is so different than mine. Just to get an idea of like how other people truly think and feel is to me like a constantly a good way to kind of evaluate your own your own creative style. But also because that project was like such a hybrid that I've never done anything like it. So after a while, like each dot project is different, but you kind of fall into the same formula of like, all right, go through the raw, find the bites, whittle it down, score. But what Cipher was a little bit different because there's a narrative aspect of it.
Right.
So just balancing both, and then I know Jeff has done a lot of scripted stuff, but I've never done scripted. So like looking at takes,
well, you have now,
like,
yeah.
I'm not
down.
Well,
it's probably pretty similar.
it's and that got me thinking like, man, like what if I can't tell what a good take is because that looks good and that other takes looks good too. Like how do you even choose? So now I start to get after coming from reality unscripted, like how scripted editing is different and it has its own different set of challenges and problems that you need to figure out. Because like, and I think that's, something that you're just gonna, the more you do, you get better at. But at first I'm like, I felt overwhelmed. It's like, what's even the best way to organize these takes? Like you just, because for reality, what I do is like, whatever sticks out, I'm going to save it and then ditch the rest, log it. But like, know that like, all right, at least let me play with the good stuff and see what I can come up with. But when you get notes about like, hey, is there like a different take? Like, what is the best way for me to organize it so that way, like, I know exactly how to, address some of these notes, especially like in person, because that's always like for me, it's nerve wracking. Like I get a little bit, I'm not the most comfortable in that type of scenario where I'm definitely a thinker where I need my own time and space to kind of hash out problems. I just can't do it when someone's behind me, but you learn as you get into those positions more and more that, all right, just kind of be able to zone things out and kind of, pursue the task at hand.
What's been the worst show you've worked on? You don't have to answer that if you don't want to. But
I'll do it in a broad stroke. I mean, it's definitely the worst experience is definitely like some of these reality shows where the expectation is pretty near impossible. And I think it's getting worse and worse. And I mean, I always like to go back to reality because for me, like it helps me fine tune my editing skill set because you're constantly under the gun, so you find ways to improve on working efficiently and effectively. Which when I'm on docs, I don't do as much. It's more like what can I do to make the best product possible? What's the most creative, artistic way? Whereas unscripted, it's more like it's a little bit more factual. It's like, all right, how do we get from point A to point B in the most efficient manner? And just going through those motions over and over again, I think makes you a very good editor.
Yeah.
But with that said, the expectations, it gets higher and higher and less time. And, because I remember when I was under, your AE, mentorship, editors had one story producer, right? That's always been like the dynamic that I thought was the norm where it is, an editor story producer. Now it's, editors get less help and now they're asked to, find the bites, craft the story and then edit all within the same timeline, which is like very challenging. So now I know it's a money numbers game, but that obviously creates the situation and environment where like people are just stressed out and no one's having fun. Like it's hard to create something when you're just constantly depressed. So some of these shows with unrealistic expectations is quite challenging.
Anything else coming up you want to talk about?
I've always felt that the more I do this throughout my years of experience, like I'll get comfortable with these feelings or these like anxiety and just like imposter syndrome feelings go away. But now I'm just comfortable with that fact that they'll never go away. And it's something that I'm going to have to deal with out of forever. So just being comfortable with that, I think has lifted a lot of, anxiety off my shoulders where, okay, I know I'm going to go through these emotional, motions like through every project, but I've learned to like just calm down, breathe a little and realize, all right, it's all going to work out. At the very least, like keep editing, like, someone always told me like ABC, always be cutting, where even if you like, you're just like not in the zone, like just do something.
Wait, wasn't that always be closing? Now it's always be cutting?
always be cutting. You know, this is an editor's podcast, right? So
Did Neil say that? Did Neil say that? That's
no, he says something like, you know, take chances, make mistakes.
Yeah,
gotcha.
but actually, I have a question about that because, like, especially in docs, right? You can't always be cut. You got to think about how it's going to work together, right? So do you go on walks and stuff, or like you can't always sit there, right? I mean, that's not gonna.
So now I used to take it literally, where it's like you have to be in front of the keyboard, you know, pushing buttons. But now it's like it's a process where, you know, cutting itself is a process. So it's like, you know, you're 100% right. Like, if I'm stuck on a problem, I'll take a walk, but I'll be constantly thinking about it. And so you're always essentially cutting, like whether it's in front of your computer or in your head, like you're always trying to find ways to how can I manipulate this, you know, the visuals or the audio to tell the story. So you're always thinking about it. So, and that's like my biggest thing, like Aaron, as long as I'm like constantly trying to, you know, work it out, that's the least I could do. And then eventually, like, you know, there'll be at least a certain point in the day where you do need to, you know, effective edits on your timeline. Right. And I always try to do at least a couple hours where it's like whether it's moving stuff around to see how it feels, because that's a whole process on its own where you're constantly, you know, working out structure. Does this work better here or there? And you go back and forth, or am I missing a piece where so all that, but it's constantly, you know, working at it. I think is like my biggest advice to myself that I always tell when I get a little bit frustrated or just like depressed, like, oh man, this end project's gonna suck. Right. But, you know, it's convince myself, like, just keep on doing what I'm doing. You're eventually going to get there. And even though it's, like, very cliche about the whole trust the process, because I used to scoff at that. I was like, that is, like, the dumbest thing. Like, you know, the process might not work out. But I've come to be a believer of, all right, you do have to trust the process. Like, especially after you've gone through enough of it to understand that, you know, you're always going to have these same emotions. But at the end of the day, you're gonna be okay. So getting comfortable with that helped me feel better, you know, during like the day-to-day of editing.
Sean, you got any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for coming on. Chopping it up.